Welcome to Foreign Talk on IMN. I'm Mohammed Rikabi. Today we're very pleased to have Brigadier General Greg Aitchison, and Chief of Staff for the Combined Joint Forces Land Component Command. Welcome to the interview, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, sir. Do you have an opening statement for us?
I'd just like to say it's a pleasure to be here today, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, sir. If you kindly just enlighten us, what was the Land Combined Command played on the war against Daesh?
So the Land Component Command is part of the coalition's contribution to assisting the Iraqi security forces in the defeat of Daesh. We have 23 nations that make up the Land Component Command, and we primarily work by, with, and through the Iraqi army forces, and we assisted in providing advice, assistance, sometimes accompanying and enabling to find, root out, and defeat Daesh in the population centers where we've been successful to date.
You said assistant. Is your assistant going towards training, guidance only, or the coalition forces did participate actually in the real fight against Daesh?
So in terms of our level of assistance and advice, we helped down at the division level. So our soldiers weren't directly involved in combat operations. They assisted the commanders in the planning and execution of those combat operations. And then in parallel, we assisted in the training side to help develop both the collective abilities of the brigades that were in the fight, as well as the soldiers that made up those brigades.
Well, what you're currently, your command, doing to support the Iraqi military?
So we continue to do exactly that. Even though combat operations have slowed down, there are still ongoing operations. The Iraqi security forces just finished up 3 concurrent operations, one of those being in the Huija area. And so we continue to provide advice and assistance from the operational commands. And then our focus is beginning to shift towards that training mandate.
Okay, if there is this training with the Iraqi forces, you guys facing any difficulties in it, or things are smooth?
No, the coalition remains quite engaged. In fact, we have more nations that are indicating that they're interested in joining, particularly on the training side. We have a number of build partner capacity sites around the country to help deliver that training. And many of those sites are multinational. And the Iraqi army in particular, which is our primary security partner, but the federal police and other elements of the Iraqi security forces seem to be very interested in the training that's being provided now that the security situation has stabilized.
Okay, in general, in your evaluation, in general, the security situation in Iraq, is it stable completely, or there is areas for improvement, you believe?
I think certainly the physical defeat of Daesh and the defeat of the physical caliphate is a huge step towards reestablishing security within the borders of Iraq. Clearly there are still elements of ISIS that try to, conduct operations within areas within the country. But I think that if we look back to the combat operations in Mosul and the challenge of rooting out an enemy that was seated within a dense urban population center and where we are today, I think it's safe to say that the security situation has improved dramatically. And we see hundreds of thousands of internally displaced persons returning to their homes and returning to a sense of normalcy. And then with the reconciliation, reconstruction, rehabilitation processes that are ongoing, I think that trend will only continue.
Your command currently working on a training, and if there is such thing, what kind of training you guys doing with the Iraqi forces rather, and there is any future plans for the near future?
So I'll speak to the future plans first.
Yeah,
we see it lasting, years to help the Iraqi Army, Air Force, and other elements of the security forces become more professional, more capable of dealing with their internal and external security threats. We provide training across the spectrum of training: marksmanship, first aid, counter IED, and then at the higher levels, collective training so that they can work together as teams in order to effectively function within their responsibilities.
Currently, the situation in Iraq are very much secure, as you just said, but there is challenges facing the Iraqi people and the Iraqi government. We're talking about May, next May, we will have the election. And besides, our neighbors are not very secure situation and stable. This border control things, you guys working with the Iraqi forces towards better control or better arrange border control things?
We are. We're working with the government of Iraq to, through the Ministry of Interior, for example, to help prepare border guard forces to secure the border with all of Iraq's neighbors. And there's a program specifically called Border Guard in a Box where they'll be equipped to be able to provide that security along the frontier with your neighbors. And I think that's an important step within the government of Iraq's security framework overall. But you know, ultimately, every nation needs to be able to protect its borders, and so that particular program is very important to the future security of Iraq.
Absolutely. As you know, sir, land component, it's the main element of the military as a whole, is with direct involvement with the people on the ground. You guys involved with such a there is any humanitarian assistance from your side to the people? As you know, there is displaced people. The situation there is not the best situation we wish for. So there is a humanitarian aspect to your present also? There
is, indirectly, I'll say. The government of Iraq, with its international partners through the United Nations or bilateral relationships with individual nations or through other governmental and non-governmental organizations, I think has been pretty successful in trying to assist internally displaced persons to return to their homes. The challenge is that security must exist prior to people returning to their homes, and there's still legacy IEDs in a lot of the urban areas, so in Mosul and Tal Afar, and even more recently the areas cleared around Al-Qaim, where the government of Iraq, the Iraqi security forces, and non-governmental organizations are going through to try to make homes safe again for people to return to. And so our role in that primarily is to assist the Iraqi security forces in establishing security. But we do have members of the headquarters staff who work with the task forces on the ground, who work with their partners, their security partners, and work with the non-governmental organizations and United Nations organizations to help set the conditions for people to return to their homes. And linking it back to the election, that's an important precondition for people to be able to vote. And so, and the exercise,
environment, obviously.
Absolutely, and the exercising of democratic rights and freedoms is a hallmark of a great country like Iraq.
Thank you, sir. You will consider the situation, unstable situation with the neighbors, like example, Syria. You know the situation there. That Syrian-Turkish border also there is a challenge. This is there will be an impact directly or indirectly on this Iraqi security, and you guys shifting your focus also more on that part of Iraq. I mean, with the Iraqi government, obviously.
I think all the borders with all of its neighboring nations, obviously, as I said, need to be secure. It's a responsibility of government. The security situation in Syria right now remains a bit of a challenge, I think, in some areas in particular. And so our goal is to work with the ministries to help them train soldiers and equip them in order to provide that security on the Iraqi side of the border. That's where our focus is with the Combined Joint Land Forces Component Command. Our focus has been strictly within Iraq as opposed to the Combined Joint Task Force Headquarters, which oversees operations in other countries as well.
Kindly, we'll take a short break and then we'll be right back. Stay with us, we'll be right back. Thank you. Welcome back to Foreign Talk. General, if we tackle the issue of air forces, they do provide support to your commands, and they continue with their support, even though the Iraqi government have declared already their victory against Daesh, and this operation is going on to protect the Iraqi land and keep it safe.
So the declaration of victory against Daesh last month was an important step in closing that chapter, but moving forward, obviously, there's more work that remains to be done. And so while we primarily partner with land forces, we do have elements within Iraq that work with the Iraqi aviation and air forces, and from what I understand, their progress in the last few years, both in on the Air Force side and the aviation side, has been quite remarkable. They now conduct independent operations in support of Iraqi security forces without our specific assistance. We do provide advise and assist teams to the Air Force, but they've proven very capable in operations in the last month.
But the coalition force is also supporting them with intelligence, with the information needed and all this, because as you know, there is a steep sales for Daesh, and we can see unfortunate explosions on innocent people in Baghdad, for example. So this intelligence and this information are being provided to the Iraqi government and the Iraqi people, the Iraqi military office.
Absolutely, the collaboration between our military forces and the ministries of the government of Iraq, not just the MOD, is very good. And notwithstanding the unfortunate incidents in Baghdad over the last couple of days, I think that the operational commands that are responsible for security in the urban centers actually do quite a credible job of protecting. The fact is that in a population where people are motivated by extreme ideas and ideologies, individuals in any nation will be able to carry out attacks. We've seen it in London lately, in Paris, and so this isn't, unfortunately, exclusive to Iraq. Obviously, the problem here persists, and the sharing of intelligence is an important part of the process to be able to target those. And so I think one of the areas where we will continue to be able to assist is in the finding of those sleeper cells. But the Iraqi security forces have proven very capable of going in and neutralizing those cells in Mosul, Baghdad, Hawija most recently as well. Unfortunately, sometimes bad people slip through.
So after all these years fighting against Daesh, you believe personally that the Iraqi security forces are capable of protecting their own people and their own land?
I think that in the last 3 years, the Iraqi security forces have come a long way. The Army and some of the specific divisions within the Army have proven very capable. As I say, in the last couple of months, we see Iraqi security forces conducting independent operations. Recently in Baghdad, an independent operation conducted using Iraqi intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance unmanned aerial vehicles. A security operation was conducted without our assistance, and that's a huge demonstration of their ability to secure their population independently.
As you follow up the news, the situation are very much under the control of the Syrian government on their borders, on their side of the borders. You think this will, once again, impact the Iraqi security situation as a whole, especially if there is a cooperation between the Iraqi government and the Syrian side, the border, just to control the border? Because as you know, they were, at some point, there were a lot of terrorists crossing the border from that point. That element, I believe, must be worked on more, you think? Or?
Well, the security situation, I think, along the border between Syria and Iraq is a complicated and a complex one. As I mentioned earlier, our role is to help the Border Guard Force prepare for their role to secure that border and help equip them in order to be able to do their job, which allows the Iraqi army to resume the roles that it's designed for. But I think in the long term, over the next year or two, we'll be able to train sufficient guards to take on that task. It's a challenge. There's a lot of soldiers that need to be trained across
the coalition forces are participating in such a training on the border side, correct? I mean, the coalition forces are providing and supporting the Iraqi government with the training and the equipment.
We are.
So we're their borders.
We are
in our drones and all this intelligence to control the borders. There is cooperation between both sides, correct?
There is, and so we right now are training soldiers in our training sites to take on that border guard role, and we are equipping them. As I mentioned, we have the border guard in a box, which is a pretty good capability to equip those soldiers, those border guard forces, in order to occupy areas and positions along the border in order to secure it.
So your command currently, their job, it's mainly training the Iraqi soldiers, nothing else.
Since combat operations ended, our focus has shifted to training. We still continue to support on the operations front, but certainly our focus has shifted now towards training soldiers and to prepare them to take on the security tasks themselves. But we do continue to conduct operations with our security partners.
Do you see, in your personal judgment, do you see there is any future for the coalition forces to remain in Iraq for a longer period, or you think it just depends on the Iraqi government and their call on the need on the ground?
It depends absolutely on the government of Iraq. We're here at their request. We're here with pleasure to help. I think we all recognize the threat that ISIS posed, and now our focus is shifting to the training and professionalization of the Iraqi security forces. And so I think from a coalition point of view, we're prepared to stay here as long as the government of Iraq chooses to allow us to.
What do you think the main reason unfortunate situations are happening for the explosions here and there? If you just said, and obviously we feel it on the ground in Baghdad and Iraq, the security have been stable, much better than it used to be a couple of months and years, obviously. But there is unfortunate incidents here and there. What do you think the Iraqi forces must focus more on the intelligence side, on the training, or what exactly you think the element or the component we are missing so allow this unfortunate incident to happen to our people?
Yeah, you know, the fact is that any motivated enemy is going to find weaknesses in any security forces structure. And as I said, regrettably, we've seen it in other nations' capitals. You know, Baghdad's a big city, and it's very difficult to secure large cities, dense urban populations. And at the end of the day, the convincing the population that there is a better alternative to violence, regardless of what prompts that violence, is one important step, and that's a pan-government role, I think. With respect to security operations, again, I think that one of the areas we can continue to assist is in the integration of intelligence and assisting in some of the technology that we can bring to bear against that determined enemy. And then simultaneously continuing to train. So the police force training, the community police training that we're doing right now, led by Italy, is a great example of helping the police forces get out and integrate with the population so that they can anticipate any changes to the security situation and deal with it proactively, so that incidents like yesterday and the day before don't manifest themselves again in the loss of life.
I believe one of the elements must be tackled, and you know better than anybody else. I believe the source of the problem itself. There is finance out there from so many places and directions and countries, unfortunately. And we're not talking about the official side of it, but there is source to provide these terrorists with. My question is basically the coalition forces also involved in with the international community, involved on fighting, direct or indirect, that the fund and all this resource for the terrorism?
I think that if you look at it as a network, the financing side is critical to any organization's ability to operate. So it's not an army role, obviously, but our security partners, international security partners, I'm certain, are taking steps to interdict those aspects of the network. Other elements that I think we can take a role on, whether leading or supporting, is in the information space, you know, cyberspace, and how the ideology continues to be able to exist sort of publicly in a non-physical way, in order to get ahead of you know, people whose beliefs are changed as a result of external influences. And so those two things, I think, are two key areas where the international community can move forward and help, not just Iraq, but Iraq, Syria, nations in Africa and the Asia Pacific, to deal with the threat that will continue to exist beyond the borders of Iraq.
Just be frank with you, I will get whatever our people, my people, thinking out there. The question is very simple for them. I'm an Iraqi sitting in my country. How come the guy from France, US, all Europe, they come and they arrive to Iraq? They must be roads, they must be people assisting them around the way. I mean, the coalition forces, you believe they are fighting whatever direction they coming through to our country, they are arriving, unfortunately, to do whatever they're doing. They're killing people for no reason, whatever their belief is. The coalition forces, obviously, with you guys doing the best you can, obviously, to stop all this worrying to our country.
I don't know either. I wish there was an easy answer to combating the ideology that makes
so the ideology
human
itself,
beings.
They will find ways, whatever it is you guys fighting against, there is always ways for them to change their faces, if you like, correct?
I think so, and that makes it very difficult for combat forces like armies to deal with. The solution space is elsewhere, unfortunately.
Shift our focus on the other side of the fight. We just spoke earlier about the psychological operation things. After the explosions in Baghdad, we saw, like yesterday, unfortunate loss of lives. We saw it's not the explosion itself and the impact, unfortunate impact for the people. We saw after that the propaganda that bad guys doing, especially on the social media. You think this is one of the aspects must be fought by the coalition forces and the international community, besides obviously the Iraqi people and the Iraqi government and the Iraqi media, definitely?
Absolutely. The social media space knows no international boundaries, and it's a way of influencing people's beliefs. It undermines people's confidence in governments. But there's an old army adage that the first reports are always wrong, and so people can take advantage of a lack of information early on after an incident, and then eventually as the truth comes out. And I think that's a key part of what we can help with on the media side, is getting the truth out there to the people so that they understand accurately what the security situation is. There's a lot of violence in a lot of big cities. There are cities in the world that have 1,000 people murdered a year, and it's a terrible thing. But in Western nations, the security situation with advanced police forces has the same challenges against violence as does Baghdad, for example. And so it's a challenge for governments, for police forces, for militaries, for people that operate and defend in cyberspace to protect people from bad information or bad acts.
We're absolutely very grateful for your patience. Thank you so very much for your time. And if you have a closing statement for our viewers.
I'd just like to thank you for the opportunity. I've been here for many months now, and I've come to appreciate the challenge of the security situation as it's evolved here in Iraq, this being my first time to this particular country. But I will, thank you. But I will say that the Iraqi security forces have made a big difference, and while we have assisted them in achieving the success that they have achieved, it has been through their effort, that the population centers have been cleared of ISIS over the last 2.5 years.
Thank you, sir. Wish you all the best in your job.
Thanks very much.
On your personal level also. Thank you very much, sir. And thank you, dear viewers. That was our interview with Brigadier General Greg Aitchison, Chief of Staff for the Combined Joint Forces Land Component Command. Thank you. I'll see you next time.